Good morning, everybody. We're to get started.
I have no complaints. We won't have any complaints, so we're not too very telling.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the UPD Board Meeting for Thursday, October 20th. Wondering, Harmony, are we set to go? Yes, everything's ready to go. Okay. Do you mind taking a roll call?
Director Bradley,
Here.
Director Brahms, Director Cardenas, Director Daly,
Here.
Director Keighley,
Here.
Director Litvack, here, Director Olson, Director Peterson,
Here.
Director Prokopas,
Here.
Director Silvestrini,
Here.
Director Stevenson.
Here.
Thank you, Harmony. We'll go ahead and get started on our agenda. Is there anyone here who would like to make public comment? Seeing none, we'll move on to our next item, which is our UPD update by Sheriff Rosie Rivera.
Good morning, everyone. First thing I want to talk about is we received a grant we're really excited about. Our Metro Mental Health Unit received a $250,000 federal grant. We're really excited about that. So this is a 3-year grant. The grant will pay for a part-time social worker to create a new mental health training program based off of the state of Utah's current curriculum, and it's nationally recognized by what's called the Memphis model, and that's what we have been following. The enhanced training will help officers better respond to mental health calls, and we really believe that this is going to make a huge difference for not just us, but all the agencies that participate in the Metro Mental Health Unit. The only other update I have is we attended an interim committee hearing yesterday. Myself and the undersheriff were there. Some of our staff and some of you were there, but I felt like the rest of the UPD board needs to know what occurred and what potentially could happen. So we weren't quite sure what we were there for. The agenda said it had to do with sheriff's statutory duties and UPD. When we got there, there were many members who talked about, as I have talked about in the past, that I had asked Mayor Silvestrini to take a look at forming a committee to review the countywide services for not just the county, but for the UPD and what is going on with countywide services. So that was discussed, that review. Members of the committee were there to speak. But we were kind of surprised that it went to the state legislature to make decisions on a county issue. So we did ask that they allow this review to finish and let the county council make these decisions on what they want to do with countywide services. Some things that came up that will have an impact, that I believe would have an impact on all of you, is Councilwoman Amy Linder Newton testified that her goal is to remove the elected sheriff from participating in interlocals and remove the sheriff from the UPD. Regardless whether the UPD board selects the sheriff, she is going to, her intent is to have legislation written. And also we had conversations. So for some reason, South Jordan's city manager testified and South Jordan's chief, they have issues with the way countywide services are and shared services with UPD are occurring. So they testified as well, and a conversation I had afterwards, some of the issue is the fact that Salt Lake County pays, so Salt Lake, UPD is the law enforcement arm of the sheriff. That was taken away from the sheriff when UPD was created. So the previous sheriff gave up that. And so the UPD has been the law enforcement arm since UPD was Well, they have issues with the countywide being part of the PD. They would like to see countywide either removed from the UPD, for sure the sheriff removed, but also potentially to start contracting those out. When I spoke with the South Jordan chief, there was a conversation about contracting canyons out. Now, in the statute, that is a statutory requirement of the sheriff. So that's a potential. He mentioned that that Cottonwood Heights should have the opportunity to bid on providing services for Little Cottonwood Canyon, Big Cottonwood Canyon. And these issues have come up multiple times, but it's just going to be a larger conversation with the county council. But I think all of you need to understand these conversations are really happening. And I mean, they took it to the state legislature this time. So I don't know what the future is going to be. We have spent 3 years providing Councilwoman Amy Winder Minton data, providing her all the information, how we operate, everything that we have spent hundreds of hours preparing information. And now we find out what the true intent was yesterday. So that's where we're at. I'm here to answer any questions for you.
So I maybe just add to what the sheriff said. I have been trying to find out what Representative Jordan Tusher was going to, what he was going to propose in legislation for some time. I was able to talk to him yesterday. I think it was about at 10 o'clock in the morning. I found out from him that he's contemplating a bill that would provide 2 things, basically. One of them would say that in an interlocal police agency, the sheriff may not serve as chief. Okay, so that's the first thing the sheriff talked about. And then the other part of his bill was going to address, I guess, in some fashion, I don't know how the state would propose to do this, but address what kinds of services could be provided on a countywide basis by the county government. And I do think in discussing this with him, I was able to, I think, convince him that he should hold off on the second part of that, and that our committee was actually addressing some of these things, and that it would be far better if there was a local government or a county government solution to that kind of question. But there, he's trying to address, I think, complaints from his constituents, and I hate to say that some of these are maybe what I call the usual suspects, but they are. And but there is from the work that we've done on our committee, I can tell that police jurisdictions outside of UPD are concerned about county funds UPD to perform some of these countywide services without an opportunity for either their officers to participate on the countywide budget, and or there are some services that some of them would disagree should be provided on a countywide basis. Now, I think we've made some progress in this committee in convincing at least the committee members. I think we have pretty broad agreement that pretty much everything that the county council provides on a countywide basis is an appropriate countywide service. The only one of those things that I am hearing that there's some question about is the mental health unit. And people have suggested that should be provided on a subscription basis, so that if a community wants that service, they pay something for it. But those that don't want it or decided to handle that issue a different way, they don't get taxed for it out of the county's general fund. All of this is wrapped up in the concern that county general fund dollars are being spent to more heavily benefit UPD jurisdictions. And I think we have had good conversations about things like the drug court, the Metro Gang Task Force, the DEA Task Force, and the police chiefs that are participating in our call, I think generally agree that those are valuable countywide services. But what they have suggested is that rather than the county hiring, you know, a UPD sergeant and UPD officers to staff those units, that there be some opportunity for their police officers to participate and then get that training, bring that expertise back into their own departments. Frankly, that argument is hard to say no to, okay? In my opinion, it's just a question really of how would that work, okay? How would you do that? Are you gonna like make these other departments bid and say, we'll provide an officer for, you know, $100,000 and of countywide funding, and somebody else will say, we'll do it for 95,000, you know, something like that. Do you bid it? Do you have a rotation? Do you let other chiefs, the Chiefs Association, try to determine that? But I can understand the fairness question there that is present. And then so that's where the committee is going. I think that's kind of in a good direction, but we still do have a sentiment that the sheriff that there's a conflict and the sheriff should not be the chief of UPD and the county sheriff. And we've addressed this by, you know, talking about, you know, there are different categories of services here that we're dealing with. Some of them are statutory duties of the sheriff, where the sheriff is required under state law to provide certain services like policing in the unincorporated county. And that state law provides that the sheriff is supposed to be in charge of those things. And that's why UPD does canyon patrol, and the sheriff, as the CEO of UPD, can fulfill that statutory requirement. So there was a suggestion that maybe Cottonwood Heights or somebody else might bid on canyon patrol, but as we actually discussed that in our committee, we've kind of come to the discussion we've had is that communities like Sandy are saying, like, we don't want to provide, we might want to do Little Cottonwood Canyon, but we don't want to do Emigration Canyon or Mill Creek or up there with, I mean, so I don't know. I mean, I suppose it could be offered for bid and we'd be back to square one. But anyway, I guess the thing that we have to expect though is that, well, we might, and there was, I think, sentiment on the committee to let the county try to resolve the problems of the countywide services at our level before it goes to the legislature, because frankly, I don't think they would know what exactly to do about that. But I'm concerned at least that concept of removing the sheriff as the CEO of UPD could be something that comes out in legislation that we'll have to deal with. And you know, I had a chance to talk to some of the committee members afterwards, and at least a couple of them expressed the idea that that it would cost more. They recognize that it would cost county residents more if the sheriff wasn't in charge of these things and there weren't economies achieved with the sheriff working through UPD. But I don't know that they're in the majority on that. And I know that there are others that you know, that may disagree. And then the other issue that you have on this committee is that the members of this committee are from all over the state. There a lot of them are from Salt Lake County, might have an appreciation for this problem, but there are other people from outside of Salt Lake County that don't understand this at all, right? So this is going to be something we're going to need to work on, but I think that we should be concerned about the legislature at least entertaining the first part of Representative Tusher's proposed legislation. And we haven't seen a draft of that; it's not out yet, but at least that's what and that's what he said in his testimony before the committee. And he is a member of that committee. It's the Political Subdivisions Committee. So.
It did come out that they were only going to change it for Salt Lake County. Any questions, anybody?
Sorry, Sheriff. I think we've worked so hard as a board to stabilize this organization and come to consensus as a group about how we operate, how we move forward. And it's disappointing that others feel they know better. So,
And it does take a toll on our folks,
you know,
especially the folks that have for 3 years been providing data and, you know, doing tours and sitting down and meeting and I mean, hundreds of hours from all of our chiefs and other folks. And, you know, that's time consuming, takes them away from the regular duties. But then at the same time, all of this has been put out in the public and media was there yesterday. And so our officers are hearing that and they're still always wondering, about UPD. So it's just won't go away. Okay,
Thanks for the update, Sheriff.
thank you.
Anything else from you today?
No, I think I'm moving up. Yes.
Thanks. We'll move on to our next agenda item, which is the governance committee update. Mayor Silvestrini.
Yeah, so we met and we discussed the proposal case by Midvale that we talked about previously about putting some, I guess, parameters on the budget process and requiring effectively a majority weighted vote to change the budget. The amount of that. That's roughly a summary and look at some language. I know Harry can address this, and frankly, this language is still being modified. I think we got Midville's edits to the proposal yesterday, and then I know that Lisa Dudley had some additional comments that Harry will talk about. But the question is whether we could consider this today, or we could potentially send this to the finance committee and see if they have any concerns about it.
So, yeah, thank you. So the committee was, when it met, discussed the proposed deadline that Midvale had proposed of no later than March, approving what I guess would be a preliminary budget numbers for shared services, but that would include salaries as well. And that would also impact, of course, the precinct budgets. But the proposal that they want to do is to allow a precinct afterwards or a city to perhaps amend its budget if it just is an expense to that precinct only, but to lock into the greatest extent possible what the maximum, I guess it's called budget increase maximum, would be a preliminary budget increase maximum for the fiscal year in March, and that to change that, it would require a 75% weighted vote, which is called simply a supermajority 75% weighted vote in the proposal. So when we got this yesterday and some of the proposed changes define what is a preliminary budget increase maximum, I sent it to Lisa. She had made some edits to both the front piece, which were of course accurate. We're not recommending approval at this time. She said it's discussion only, and I appreciate that change. But that she also wanted to create an exception in here, for example, grants, because those are essentially revenue neutral to the members. So if there's a grant that comes in that allows us to spend more money, it's not subject to this vote. It would be simply that would be something, of course, the board would be aware of the budget amendment because it is an increase in expenditure, but not an increase in assessment. So essentially, the only other real suggestion she made is that she thinks that perhaps this language should go through the Budget and Finance Committee for a review. They may want to define things differently in terms of this, and then send it back to the board with their comments or edits. And I think that would be appropriate because I don't typically attend the budget meetings, and I think it would be helpful to have input from both the committee and perhaps even the new CFO as well. And if the new CFO is not on board by the time this goes before the budget committee, Lisa, of course, would be there to assist in the drafting. So I don't think this changes anything regarding the intent of Midvale to essentially create sort of a preliminary budget number in March that would require a change if it's going to cost the members more, it results in additional expenditures. I think it's been defined here that it's clear. But just in terms of maybe working on the language a little bit, because we were all scrambling a little bit yesterday to try to come up with this, rather than having this being written in stone, I would suggest that it go to the budget committee, and then maybe we would of course work directly with Midvale on this, but that I don't think any of the language changes that either Lisa or Midvale proposes are meant to do anything different than get a preliminary budget number in March for shared services that would include salaries, that would then essentially, govern the drafting of the budget for the upcoming year, and could change, but would need to have a 75% supermajority weighted vote to do that. And I think Midvale, in discussions with Mayor Stevenson, recognizes sometimes things do change where you need to do that, but that it works to the benefit of all members, that we try to arrive at numbers as early as we can. Some numbers are unknowable in March, like our workers' comp renewal, but other parts of it are, I think, will be known, or at least known to the greatest extent possible. And in talking both to the sheriff and the administration, I think they agree we can likely work with this, that this was simply the only time, in fact, when this would have been difficult, would have been the last 2 years of the everybody holding on to their budget increase numbers on salaries until the last minute and not releasing that information. So we don't find out till April or May what everybody else is doing on salaries. And I think if it weren't for the salary wars in the last 2 years, this would be no problem. And so, and I think recognizing that all indications are that that is not going to happen again this year, that this is something that we could live with going forward with a safety valve, and say that sometimes you can't predict some changes and there may need to be some factors that go into it. And obviously, I think that something to send to the board in final form for its May meeting, December meeting, November meeting, so that we can hopefully have it done by then. If not November, it would be December, because I know the intent is this will apply this year moving forward. So it's not being recommended at this time. I think it's just up to the board to decide if they want to do this, but that we're tweaking language now that the concept hasn't changed.
I agree with the intent of this, but I also agree that it needs to go back to the committees, because I do have some questions about the timing and making a recommendation in March that is essentially going to kind of bind the board at that point. Just the timing of it. And I'd just like to have an opportunity as a finance committee and benefits of comp to go through it and really look at it and say, okay, what is the intent of this, and does it accomplish that, or should we move the date back a little bit? Because I don't want to make a decision and a recommendation from the finance committee not having really strong information about what the market wages are, which is going to be the critical piece of this. I mean, we'll know what URS is, I think, and I think we'll know what our health insurance costs are going to be, but the market piece is going to be the critical piece. And I'm going through my head, like, I don't want to make a recommendation until I'm pretty confident what those are. So I'd appreciate the opportunity to look at this, the language of it, especially as it relates to, say, the March timing, and see if that's an appropriate date.
Yeah, I'd like the opportunity to ponder this a little bit, but I want to say I do appreciate the catches about making sure that we accommodate revenue neutral grant funding, and also to have flexibility and not require a vote if the precinct wants to add a couple of officers, having just done that to accommodate a temporary homeless shelter.
What are you talking about? Thank you for doing that.
So I think the Midvale edits made this a better proposal than it was, and I think Lisa's suggestions are good. I do think that I'm not sure who's the chair of the budget finance. Is it
Carolyn.
Carolyn.
Okay. Well, I think that we can work on, through our administration, setting up a meeting to review this and discuss some of these issues. And maybe report back with a consensus draft of the amendment to the interlocal, and for consideration in the November meeting.
That works. Any more discussion?
Yeah, I can talk more technically on the next item too, so.
Do you have a problem with presenting this to finance committee?
Nope, that sounds great to us. Again, the main thing here is mostly is we really appreciate you getting that draft to us, the governance committee, looking at this. There's just a few things, again, for the reason for this, and mostly it's trying to make sure that this is looking at overall costs and not necessarily member fee. I know that often we may talk about that as the same, but in the past specifically, we've had increased costs and then fund balance is used to adjust member fee. And so we want to talk about what is that whole cost and look at that. And ultimately make sure that we do leave that flexibility for precincts, just as Mayor Silvestrini alluded to, of needing to do that. We want to make sure that flexibility is there. This is not meant to constrain UPD with wage wars, any other unforeseen circumstances that may come up. But ultimately for cities, we have set revenue, we have revenues that come in, and that is ultimately what we have, unless we go through a process of truth and taxation. And this is just trying to, I think, in a sense, replicate that we, instead of UPD saying, here's what we want or need, that cities are saying, here's what we can afford. And if they need more than that for unforeseen circumstances, those are conversations that we can have. And again, I think the supermajority vote of that is just to have that extra piece, just as we all have to go through truth and taxation. If we need more funds, I'm just trying to have another check in that process to be able to, I think for us to be able to have more the reasoning behind it, and that we can have a conversation and ultimately vote on that. So that's just, again, that's the main reason for this, is not to try to constrain. I know we've had the conversation of timeline. We try to work with UPD on that. We do not want to set up a timeline that is unrealistic or that would put us out of compliance in our own policy potentially. But again, just trying to set up that basic timeline that the board can set up a number up front based off of the revenues that we're expecting to have. And again, if we need to do more than that, that's conversations we can have as a board. I'm happy to try to answer any questions or add any more context if there's any questions.
I don't think so. Did you want to speak to the amendment specifically at all? I mean, I've glanced at it. It seems pretty technical in nature.
Again, it's not as concerned about direct language. It says we propose some language, and then again working with Harry and Lisa to come up with the finance committee now to come up exactly with what that looks like. We're not as concerned about exact language, more so again just ensuring that this is looking at costs and that we still provide the flexibility for precincts.
Is everyone comfortable waiting a month and we'll send this to an interim budget and finance committee? Is that the committee we want to send this to for review and discussion? And ultimately come back to our November meeting with final language? All right. This was an informational item, correct?
Yes.
Great. All right. Then we have our plan moving forward. So I believe we've addressed number 4 and number 5 on the agenda. We'll move on to number 6. The Operations Study Review Committee, Mayor Stevenson.
Perfect. So we had our first meeting as a committee where really we just kind of laid out an overview of what we see in this operations review. It's really the main discussion that I feel we had in that was I'd say as I went into that, it was really focused on the shared services piece. And the conversation that came out of that is we really need to also review precincts in that. And if we are doing, and this makes sense, if we are doing an organizational review and not taking into account everything that the precincts do, that is not going to be a review that really helps us be a better organization. So that is, we agreed to that. So at this point, the basic plan and Chief Mazur and Ackerman are going to speak to this. But the idea is to review shared services and the precincts. But Chief Maz and Ackerman did just meet with the IACP in person, and so I've asked Maz to give us some more information on how that meeting went.
Thank you, sir. Chief Ackerman and I just returned from Dallas, Texas last night, and the stars are big and bright down there. We had a pretty good experience, great training. We did have the opportunity to meet with IACP twice, once on Sunday and then once on Tuesday. My immediate takeaway from our meetings were that this is the right group to do this. Very impressive in terms of pretty confident. We have these professionals that really come in and do fair, balanced, honest assessment of department capabilities. We did learn that, so we met with Megan Casanova and Carl. Carl actually was involved in the Salt Lake City study So he intends to bring some folks that did that because they're already familiar with the song, the community and the area, so. We talked a lot about kind of what the expectations were. We shared the notes taken by the committee with them. Some of the expectations in terms of very preliminary timelines in this book. Keep in mind, we just barely talked, and so we don't have a few minutes to analyze this. What they're doing is creating a proposal that will be given to the committee and to the board members. In terms of the scope and the cost of the study. One thing we did learn is that we asked for a lot, and so we budgeted just under $100,000 for the study. We'll probably use a portion of that because of the amount of data that we're asking for. This point, the initial timeline is that they will be on site in December, start their field work with the department. They'll again come on site in February. And during that time, they will also be presenting information to the board at any time you would like, or to any of your councils and groups. And then the final report will be issued in August. In the meantime, I know there's been a request for some updates, for some information in the spring, first quarter of 2023. And they can provide that. They can give you, okay, here's where we're at, some like preliminary findings. So, and then they will be
Sorry,
having.
Chair, when was the preliminary findings? March, you said?
They can start to give us an idea of kind of where they're at and some of the information we're trying to have the actual final draft and the final study will be done. They estimate in about August.
Okay.
I think you said the first visit here will be in December and they're coming back in March or February.
February, March, they'd be coming back and presenting some deliverables, which we put as a priority so that we can make our budgetary decisions. Furthermore, they are planning tentatively for a May report on preliminary findings, which she describes as really your first look at what the final report is going to look like. But at that point, they'll look at, is it understandable? Does it really capture something that's helpful? Do they need to expand on specific areas? And then they would have a couple more months into August before they present an official, actual final report.
And I've also asked they would be willing to have a Zoom meeting with the subcommittee, just so that you can meet them and kind of get an idea of who they are and how they're operating. I'm frankly really looking forward to it. I'm really curious to find out what their outside perspective is, recommendations they have for us, what we're doing well, and what we could do better. So I think it'll be very, very worthwhile. And there's just no question in my mind after being on this trip and getting back, we're definitely picking the right people. They're clearly the right folks to do this because of their backgrounds. So.
I would echo that. As we were describing a lot of the notes and talking about how the UPD is unique, different, they were adding in just from their experience other angles and blind spots that we haven't even considered to complement those things. I'm confident when they start meeting with you independently and you start hearing what they bring, they'll have the same confidence in their abilities.
Did they speak to that they've reviewed an organization that would be similar in way to you?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, the Loudoun County study that I had mentioned to the committee, we talked about that briefly. Loudoun County back east is somewhat similarly constructed to the UPD. So they went back into the study there about the sheriff issue and the CEO, sheriff and the CEO leading the organization. So listening to them talk about that was, I kept saying, that sounds so similar to us, except Loudoun County is about half the size. So, they go out, this is what they do for a living. They go out, they meet all sorts of departments. It's broad, deep range of experience of going out and analyzing organizations, their strengths and weaknesses, coming up with recommendations. They have those studies similar to what our picture is.
Nick or Carolyn, we've got Nick from Labor as part of the committee. Do either of you want to add anything to how that meeting went, or any context you want to add?
This is Nick Renfro from Salt Lake Valley Law Enforcement Association. Nothing more to add. I am excited just to kind of see the direction that you know, these blind spots that we may be missing. Like I said in the meeting earlier, I'm just, you know, really hoping to capture the whole picture and historical context of UPD, and so that we can make sure that, you know, some of these changes that we've made or things that we're looking at are assessed in, you know, the kind of the best interest in moving forward and not trying to reinvent the wheel. And if there's, you know, similar agencies that have encountered similar problems, let's kind of learn from those experiences.
And I can kind of address that as well, is we did meet with them, we kind of laid out, you know, the issues that the subcommittee came up with. And then we started talking about the allocation of funds that we have for this study, and had to kind of build it backwards, for not necessarily, well, what we afford with the amount of money. And so when we met with them again, the second time, they really boiled it down into areas of focus based upon their experience working with these other agencies. The primary being like would be the validation piece of the organization, and that would be the main point of study. However, there'd be subcomponents of that, such as doing a budget analysis, looking at tax breaks, resource allocation, the actual structure of the organization, the limits on authority. The other large piece that they would want to look at is the workload piece, looking at calls for service, police service expectations from each of the partners, and also what community expectations are of the department is kind of what they initially came up with. And there may be a few modifications, or we could expand on this. I know they're excited to talk to the committee to go over some of these things and look at that, but very structured in what their proposal was, and certainly complements what our request was.
So we got there.
Thank you.
Sounds good.
Any questions from the board? Anything else you'd like to add? Thank you very much. Thanks for your research on this. It's important to have the right organization do this work. All right, moving on to item number 7, acceptance of donations. Chief.
Thank you, ma'am. So we have, again, been blessed by the kindness of people that made some wonderful donations. There's one of your packets from Vic Quezada, former police officer from Sandy, and served with our department. He's a great guy. Donated 2 ballistic vests for canine dog Bolo and Tonto to the team of 2,635. Vic was part of that look when he found Elizabeth Smart, right? Vic's kind of a legend. So he's a great guy. Really appreciate your donation. And the second one's from J.C. Holt from the Operation Underground Railroad for a donation of some money to help pay for a drone. Our drone program has become very successful. That's to the $10,520.70 by GJI Latrice. Yeah, our drone programs are really well, made us much safer. And then Brad Marshall, Rex Mortensen, and Tim Bolton also made a donation, $60,741 for another DGI increase. And so what we've been able to do is, I think we have over 10 drones now that are spread out across the organization. So we have drone coverage for every shift. Most leaders in Parliament has been great part of it. Like I was just talking to Sergeant on the drone program. They had, so I go hide in a culvert. They were able to take the drone and just put it down in front of that, and the camera could see on the way in there. And so we didn't have to put a dog in person. We didn't have to do that. Capability. I guess when the suspect came out, he broke the drone. We can replace the drone. Yeah. So it's been a great program. So we're really grateful for the support. That's awesome.
So Chief, first of all, I got to kind of, and witness personally, but I saw the benefit of the drone in the hostage situation we had in Oakland. The drone actually went into the house and down the stairs and into the basement to confirm that the suspect was no longer a threat. But so I recognize the value of it. I'm curious as to why these particular individuals are making these donations, because especially on the Grant Marshall Rex Morris and Tim Goldman. I mean, why are we so lucky that we're getting this as opposed to other agencies? Because these individuals, they have a connection to UPD that they're not.
You know, they don't. Brad Marshall was a highway patrol trooper and started some businesses, and it's just, you know, we have a lot of connections and relationships with people that we used to work with. And, you know, companies just said, how can we help? What do you need?
That's awesome. I'm just curious.
It's rad. It's great. I know one thing, this is kind of with Brad, there's a group of business owners that just said, hey, you know, let's help you out. Support these warehouses. This is very generous. There's also one more donation from there. Prison paint in Midvale. $5,343. Miscellaneous paid, I think, for the feeding unit. So appreciate that. That's it.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, I'll make a motion to approve these gifts.
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Hi.
Any opposed? Thank you. Appreciate the kindness of our community members supporting our agency. All right, we will move on to the next item, which is our approval of surplus resolution 22-10-01. Chief, you're up again.
Yeah, really quick donation. It says here donation of 4 vehicles. How many vehicles to 3?
It's not in here, right?
You won't see 3, but your packet will see some 2016, 14, and 16 Ford. It's coming up for the salvage, so. Sending those out. I don't know, Harry, do we need to make a, Harry? I only see 3 vehicles on the surplus.
Harmony just walked in.
Oh, okay. Well, on this resolution here, it says 4 surplus vehicles. I only see 3 on the list.
There was only 3 on the list, right?
So you need to like amend that, or it might have been a
Yes.
typo to say 4.
I can correct that.
All right. So 3 vehicles.
I'll make a motion to approve the surplus of the 3 vehicles pursuant to the second resolution 22-10-01.
Would you second? Thank you very much. I have a motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, hearing none, we've approved that resolution. Our next agenda item is the approval of the September 15 minutes. I'll entertain a motion if you've had the opportunity to review those. Thank you.
Second.
Thank you very much. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, upcoming meetings, we do not currently have any meetings scheduled, but I believe we will be setting up a budget and finance committee meeting to review our budget resolution. But we'll circle back with everyone on that. Is there any other business from the board? This may be a record, folks, length of meeting. Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Make that motion.
Thank you. Take a second. All right, without objection, we're so adjourned. Thank you so much, everyone.
See you.